Sarah Grace Mitchell was 20 years old and homeless. Not temporarily homeless, not between houses homeless, but completely and utterly homeless in the way that only people who have never had a safe place understand. She had been homeless for 4 years, since she was 16, when she walked out of her grandmother's house at midnight with nothing but a backpack containing 3 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, and the sum total of $42 that she had been secretly saving in coins hidden inside a hollowed-out book on her grandmother's shelf. She had no family who would claim her, no one who would look for her, no one who would care if she lived or died. Just a backpack, a sleeping bag she had bought at a thrift store, and $1 bill that she had found in a gas station parking lot 3 days ago. And with that $1 bill, standing in front of a county tax assessor's office in rural Nebraska, Sarah bought an abandoned train station sitting on 23 acres of land in a valley so remote that the nearest town was 14 miles away, and the nearest person who might have cared about her was someone she had spent 4 years running away from. The station had been closed since 1987, decommissioned after nearly a century of operation. The tracks had been pulled up in 1992. The platform was crumbling into rubble. The waiting room windows were shattered, and birds nested in the rafters. The roof over the freight room had partially collapsed during a severe hailstorm in 1999, and no one had bothered to repair it since. But what nobody knew was that hidden inside the old clock tower, sealed inside a metal box that hadn't been opened in 74 years, was something that would change not just her life, but the lives of everyone in the county who would eventually hear her story and understand what it meant to be saved by a stranger who had died long ago. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel.
Sarah had been running from safety her whole life without understanding why. She was born in Omaha, Nebraska, in a small hospital on the south side of the city, to a woman named Linda who had never wanted children, and a man who was already gone before Sarah took her first breath. He had left a note on the kitchen table saying he couldn't do it, couldn't be a father, couldn't pretend to be someone he wasn't. Linda's parents, Sarah's grandparents, took her in not out of love, but out of obligation, the way people do what they think is right when they don't actually want to do it at all. Her grandmother, Edith Westbrook, was a woman from an era when children were meant to be seen, but preferably not heard, and ideally not felt or acknowledged in any emotional capacity. She had raised Sarah's mother, Linda, with the same cold discipline that had broken Linda from the inside out, and now she was raising Sarah the same way, as if suffering could be passed down like an heirloom. Edith believed in rules: breakfast at 7 o'clock sharp, lunch at noon, dinner at 6, chores done in precise order with specific techniques, and any deviation from the established way of doing things was met with swift punishment. There were no hugs in Edith's house. There were no bedtime stories or lullabies. There were no words of encouragement or affirmation. When Sarah did something well, Edith would simply nod, as if Sarah had only done what was already expected of her. When Sarah did something wrong, she was hit with a wooden spoon or sent to her room without supper. Sarah learned early to make herself invisible. She learned to anticipate what Edith wanted before Edith knew she wanted it. She learned to smile when she wanted to cry. She learned that love was conditional, revocable, and that she didn't have enough currency to purchase any of it.
Her grandfather, Henry Westbrook, was a railroad man who had worked for the Union Pacific for 43 years. He had started as a track laborer when he was 16 years old and worked his way up to become a station supervisor. He was a good man, kind in the way that men of his generation were kind, dutiful, reliable, but emotionally distant. He would sometimes bring her small gifts from the station, a piece of railroad memorabilia, a postcard from a distant town, a stick of gum. But he never hugged her, never told her he loved her, never explicitly acknowledged that he understood what Edith was doing to her. He just came home exhausted every evening, ate whatever Edith had prepared, read the newspaper, and went to bed. And because Henry didn't intervene, Sarah learned that the people who loved you still let you be hurt. By the time Sarah was 8 years old, her mother disappeared. She left a note on the kitchen table, written in shaky handwriting, that said she was sorry. She couldn't do it anymore. She hoped they would forgive her. The note didn't say where she was going,
or when she would be back. It just said she was gone. Edith read the note once, her expression hardening into something carved from stone, and then she walked to the stove and burned it in the flames. She never mentioned Linda again. It was as if Linda had never existed, as if the daughter Edith had raised and broken had simply evaporated. When Sarah asked about her mother, asked where she had gone, asked if she would come back, Edith hit her with the wooden spoon and told her never to mention that name in this house again. After that, Sarah stopped asking. After that, Sarah learned that the people who raise you can make you forget the people who birth you. Her grandfather Henry died when Sarah was 12 years old. He had a heart attack while working at the station. He had been talking to a passenger about a delayed train, and then he had clutched his chest and collapsed. He was gone before the ambulance arrived. At the funeral, people told Sarah that she was lucky, that at least he had lived a long life, at least he had died doing what he loved. But Sarah understood, in the way that traumatized children understand things, that she had just lost the only person in the house who treated her with any kind of neutral respect. With Henry gone, there was no buffer between her and Edith. There was only Edith, growing older, growing colder, spending more time in her garden and less time pretending that she cared about the girl living in her house. Edith's cruelty became more sophisticated after Henry died. She didn't hit Sarah as much. Sarah was getting too old for that, and Edith was getting too tired. But she found other ways to express her contempt. She would make dinner and serve herself and Sarah tiny portions, while leaving large amounts of food uneaten on the counter, wasting it deliberately where Sarah could see. She would say things designed to make Sarah believe that she was fundamentally broken, that she would never be loved, that her existence was an inconvenience that Edith had reluctantly agreed to tolerate. She would go days without speaking to her, creating a silence so complete that Sarah began to wonder if she actually existed. And on the rare occasions when Sarah reached out for comfort, tried to hug her grandmother or ask for help with homework, Edith would pull away with an expression of disgust, as if Sarah's need for love was itself a character flaw, a weakness that needed to be trained out of her. By the time Sarah was 15, she had stopped trying. She had given up the idea that her grandmother would ever love her. She had accepted that home was not a place where she was safe, that family was not people who cared about her, that love was something that happened to other people in other families. She had turned inward, created a small world inside her head where she was safe, and learned to survive by making herself as small and quiet and invisible as possible. But invisibility has a cost. It cost Sarah her ability to trust. It cost her her ability to believe that anyone could ever genuinely care about her. It cost her the simple human need to be seen and known and loved. These things accumulated like unpaid debts, and by the time she was 16, she was bankrupt in every way that mattered. The night she left was like any other night. Edith had made dinner, a thin soup and bread, and eaten her portion while watching Sarah from across the table with an expression of mild contempt. Sarah had eaten in silence, as she always did. After dinner, she had washed the dishes, dried them, and put them away in precisely the correct places. She had done her homework. She had gone to her room. But this time, instead of lying in bed and listening to the sounds of the house, she had packed her backpack. She had taken 3 sets of clothes, a pair of shoes and a pair of socks, her toothbrush, the money she had been saving in the hollowed-out copy of Jane Eyre that Edith had never bothered to look at because she didn't believe in books. She had left a note that said simply, "I'm gone. Don't look for me. I'm sorry I was such a disappointment." She had walked out at midnight. The last thing she remembered about her grandmother's house was the smell of the kitchen, old grease and soap, and the sound of crickets outside in the dark. She never looked back. The first 6 months of homelessness were terrifying. Sarah was 16, small for her age, and completely unprepared for a world that did not care about her. She slept in a homeless shelter for youth, a place run by an overworked social worker named Mrs. Rivera, who seemed to genuinely care, but was dealing with too many broken children to be able to help all of them. She got a job at a fast food restaurant washing dishes, working 4 hours after school for minimum wage. The money barely covered food. She had no place to sleep other than the shelter, and the shelter had rules. Be there by 9 p.m., lights out at 10, wake up at 6 a.m.
She learned to make herself invisible in a different way now. She learned to move through the world without drawing attention. She learned to sleep lightly, always aware of her surroundings, ready to run if necessary. She learned that other homeless people could be dangerous, that predators were always looking for vulnerable prey, that she needed to be clever and careful and constantly vigilant. By the time she was 17, she had been through 3 different jobs. She had been threatened by customers, sexually harassed by managers, and propositioned by men who assumed that homelessness meant she had no other choice. She had saved a little money, hidden in different places so that no one could take it all at once. She had learned that there were people in the world who were kind. Mrs. Rivera at the shelter, a librarian named Mr. Chen who let her stay in the library longer than she was supposed to, a cashier at the grocery store who always slipped her extra items at checkout. But these kindnesses were rare and unpredictable, like finding money in a pocket. At 18, she aged out of the youth shelter. She was no longer a child, no longer entitled to services, no longer anyone's responsibility. She spent that first night sleeping under a bridge, listening to the sounds of the city, understanding that she was completely and utterly alone. The next day, she went to the social services office and explained her situation. A woman named Margaret had looked at her with something like pity and had given her information about programs for homeless adults. Margaret had also given her a bus ticket to rural Nebraska, where her sister lived and operated a farm that was looking for seasonal workers. "You'll do better out there," Margaret had said. "The city isn't kind to young women like you. Maybe Nebraska will be different." Sarah had taken the bus ticket. She had taken the information for a farm called Meadowbrook, 40 miles outside of Omaha, and she had gotten on a bus heading west, toward a future she couldn't imagine, but hoped might be different from the past she was leaving behind. The farm was owned by a man named Joseph Chen, Margaret's brother-in-law, who employed seasonal workers to help with planting, maintenance, and harvest. Joseph had hired Sarah without asking many questions. He had provided a small room above the barn, 3 meals a day, and $50 a week in cash. He had taught her how to work the land, how to read soil, how to understand what plants needed. He had treated her with neutral respect, the kind of kindness that didn't require anything in return, that didn't come with strings or expectations. Sarah had worked for Joseph for 2 years. She had saved nearly every dollar he had paid her. She had lived carefully, eating the food Joseph provided, wearing the clothes she had bought, never asking for anything extra. And slowly, something inside her had begun to heal. Not the deep wounds, those would never fully heal, but the constant panic had lessened. The hypervigilance had faded slightly. She had begun to believe, in a tentative way, that the world might not be completely hostile. It was Joseph who had shown her the auction notice. He had found it in a county bulletin that came in the mail. An abandoned train station, 23 acres of land, scheduled for auction by the county for unpaid taxes. Opening bid, $1. Joseph had laughed when he showed it to Sarah, thinking it was absurd. But Sarah had stared at the photograph of the station and felt something click inside her, something that felt like recognition. "Can I see it?" she had asked. Joseph had agreed, and the following Saturday they had driven to the location. The station sat in a wide valley, surrounded by fields and distant hills. It was a Victorian structure, built in 1891 from red brick that had weathered to a deep brown. The platform stretched along the front, once elegant, but now crumbling. The waiting room was visible through broken windows, a large open space with high ceilings and wooden benches. And rising from the center of the station was a clock tower, 3 stories tall, with a large clock face on each side. The clock had stopped, its hands frozen at 3:47 p.m. Sarah had walked through the station in silence, Joseph following behind her. She had climbed the narrow stairs to the clock tower. She had looked at the clock mechanism,
at the gears frozen mid-turn, at the clock face still showing 3:47. And she had understood, in a way that made no logical sense, that she had found what she was looking for. Not a place to live, not a building to renovate, a place to belong, a structure that understood abandonment, a building that had been left behind, just like her. "This is it," she had said to Joseph. "This is home." Joseph had looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. He was a kind man, but not sentimental. "It's a wreck," he had said gently. "It would take years to restore." "I know," Sarah had replied, "but it's still standing. Someone built it to last. Someone cared enough to do it right." The county auction was held 3 weeks later in a small office in the nearest town. Sarah had dressed in her best clothes, clean jeans and a shirt that Joseph had given her. She had brought her $1 bill, crisp and new, that she had saved for this purpose. There were no other bidders. No one else wanted an abandoned train station on worthless land in the middle of nowhere. The auctioneer, a tired woman named Dolores, who had been conducting property auctions for 20 years, seemed almost embarrassed to process the sale. She had looked at Sarah with what might have been pity. "You understand there's no utilities," Dolores had said. "No running water, no electricity. The county won't help with anything. If it collapses with you in it, that's your problem." "I understand," Sarah had said. Dolores had taken the $1 bill, stamped the deed, and handed it to Sarah with the expression of someone who had just witnessed a beautiful or tragic act and wasn't sure which. That night, Sarah slept in the station for the first time. She had spread her sleeping bag on the floor of the waiting room. She had lain there, listening to the sounds of the old building, the wind whistling through broken windows, the occasional creaks as the structure settled, the scurrying of small animals in the walls. And above it all, something else, a presence, a sense that the building was breathing, that it had been waiting for someone, that she had come at exactly the right time. The next morning, she had begun to explore systematically. She had walked through every room, every hallway, every closet. She had noted which areas were most damaged, which walls were sound, which sections of roof needed immediate attention. She had climbed the narrow stairs to the clock tower, spiraling up through the darkness. At the top, in the small room where the clock mechanism was housed, she had found it. A metal box, approximately 2 feet square, bolted to the stone wall behind the clock. The bolts were old, but still secure. The box itself was sealed, but not locked. When she opened it, she found papers, land deeds dating back to 1862, property ownership documents, a will, and beneath it all, a letter, written in careful, old-fashioned handwriting, dated October 14, 1976.
"To whoever finds this," the letter began, "my name is Thomas Edward Richmond. I have spent the last 29 years in this building, watching the world change. I have watched the railroads decline. I have watched my country move toward a future where trains are relics and stations like this are forgotten. But I have also watched good people pass through these doors. I have sold tickets to families moving west to start new lives. I have welcomed soldiers returning home from wars. I have witnessed human hope and human despair, all within these walls. I inherited this land from my grandfather, who settled it in 1862. My father built the railroad line that made this station necessary. I built this station in 1891, and I have maintained it for the last 85 years. It has been the center of my life. But today, I am retiring. Tomorrow, the station will close. The railroad company is pulling up the tracks. This building will be abandoned. I don't know if this station will be preserved or demolished. I don't know if anyone will ever care about what happens to it. But I wanted to leave something behind. Something for whoever finds it. These deeds represent land that my family has owned for 3 generations. We believed in permanence. We believed that beauty mattered. We believed that building something solid,
something that would last, was a noble thing to do. I am leaving everything to the next person who truly needs it. Not the next person who wants it, but the next person who needs it desperately. The person who understands what it means to be abandoned. The person who sees something worth saving in this broken building.
If you're reading this letter, you came here for a reason. You found this station because something in you recognized something in this building. You are the person I have been waiting for, even though I never knew your name. The land is yours. Now, all 23 acres. The station is yours. Use it however you need to. Make it into something beautiful. Make it matter again. The deeds are in this box, along with documentation of a bank account that my grandfather opened in 1913. The account still exists. No one has touched it in 50 years. The balance is $47,300.8. It's yours now. Use it to rebuild. Use it to make a life. Use it to prove that beauty and permanence still matter in a world that is becoming disposable. The clock stopped when I stopped working. I think that's fitting. Time at this station stopped when the trains stopped running. But maybe time can start again. Maybe you can start it again. Thomas Edward Richmond, Station Master. Meadowbrook Station, October 14, 1976. Sarah read the letter 3 times. She sat on the cold floor of the clock tower and read the words over and over, as if repetition might change their meaning, might make them less overwhelming. Someone had thought of her, 74 years into the future. Someone had believed that someone like her would come. Someone had cared enough to leave her everything. She cried then. Not the small, controlled tears of an adult who had learned not to feel, but deep, body-shaking sobs of a young woman who had just been given permission to hope. The sobs came from a place so deep inside her that she didn't know it existed. They came from the little girl who had been abandoned by her mother, rejected by her grandmother, and dismissed by the world. They came from the teenager who had lived under a bridge. They came from the young woman who had believed that no one would ever love her, and as she cried, she understood something that would change the rest of her life, that sometimes the people who save us are people we've never met. Sometimes they save us from beyond the grave. Sometimes all it takes is one person, one moment, one act of faith in the future to change everything. Over the next 3 years, Sarah transformed the station. She worked with contractors and craftspeople, using Thomas Richmond's money carefully and deliberately, never frivolously. She restored the brick exterior, cleaning and repointing the mortar until it looked almost new. She replaced the platform with new wood that matched the original specifications, researching what the original had looked like by finding old photographs in the Nebraska State Historical Society. She restored the windows, finding craftspeople who could rebuild the frames to match the originals. She repaired the clock tower, and with help from a retired horologist, she restored the clock mechanism itself on October 14, 2020. Exactly 144 years after Thomas Richmond had built the station. Exactly 44 years after he had sealed the metal box in the clock tower, Sarah wound the clock for the first time. At precisely 3:47 p.m., the clock chimed. Time resumed in the abandoned station. She had found work at a local non-profit that helped homeless youth. She used her salary to continue maintaining the station and to give back to the community that had saved her. She opened the station to the public on weekends, telling the story of Thomas Richmond and the power of leaving something good behind. She created a small museum dedicated to the history of the railroad and the families who had built this place. She became a fixture in the community, no longer invisible, no longer unwanted, but more than that. She became a symbol. Every homeless young person who came through the station, looking at Sarah, understood that their story didn't have to end in despair, that sometimes, in the most unlikely places, in the most unexpected ways, the world conspired to save you, that sometimes people left gifts behind, not just in the form of money or possessions, but in the form of faith. Faith that the future would bring someone who needed exactly what they had to offer. Sarah Grace Mitchell was 20 years old when she became homeless. She was 20 years old when she spent her $1 on an abandoned train station in rural Nebraska. It was the best dollar she ever spent. In the years that followed, she rebuilt her life and, in the process, helped rebuild the lives of countless others. She became a keeper of history, a guardian of beauty, a bridge between the past and the future, and a living testament to the power of hope. The station still stands today, restored to its original beauty, thriving as a community center and museum. Trains no longer run through it, but people still come from all over the state to visit, to remember, to understand that we are not as alone as we think we are, that our stories matter, that sometimes someone is waiting for us, even across the decades, even across the years, believing with absolute faith that we will come and that we will understand what they have left behind. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell us in the comments, what is a place that saved you? What building or landscape made you feel like you mattered? We'd love to hear your story. See you in the next one.